line today.
That's who I gave my book to. Her.
I think we got another book. You want one?
Yeah, I got one. I got one.
Uh-oh. That doesn't always make the day start wrong.
No.
If I had, Julie had some Tylenol. I took her She always has.
What are you around here for?
Thinking.
Oh.
That's the hard part. Sometimes when I think, I'm like, I work for a company called Double T Construction. It's an asphalt paving company. I retired. Over 30 years. I wasn't around the dead bodies, but I was around the grief and all that stuff. It was so heavy. And I was like, I'm ready to do something different. And one of my best friends, he actually works for me as a funeral director. He started this construction company back in '08, and he was working for me, doing that part-time, and said I could make this a business. And so he left funeral home in like 2013 and went full-time. And so he's been doing it for almost 13 years full-time. And he's been asking me to come. I'm business development. So I try to help grow the business, streamline, find inefficiencies, meet with clients, do bids. 2 years ago, February of this year is 2 years. Yep, so I'm right on my anniversary.
I'm sure you were a light though when people, when they were crazy, but I definitely get that.
I loved it. I really did. I've always loved it. I'll always keep my license, but I don't look to go back to it ever.
Okay, so I am on that.
There he is.
I didn't realize we actually finished up the lesson a little early this morning. Matthew, how are you, brother? Growing up, yeah, not having as much time for us anymore as they used to. It is. You're right. It is. So I have found though that Luke and I are spending a lot more time together. I've gotten him into golf. He's up with golf, so we get to play golf a lot.
Quality time together. Three. Yeah. What's the last one we learned?
We're actually not in the book this week, so our lesson today is going to be about Solomon and his ups and downs. So, on Wednesday we killed Solomon off, so we have to talk about the rest of the story. And now, the rest of the story. I used to love my granddaddy when I was a kid. He had a radio on the back porch, and every day he'd go turn that radio on and sit there with a cup of coffee and listen to Paul Harvey. So anytime I was at his house, I listened to Paul Harvey.
Voice and acting matters.
You know, I don't remember. I think it was like mid-morning, wasn't it? Anybody remember that?
I don't know. I think they reran it.
Yeah, exactly.
I called it. I was just catching all reruns, obviously.
Well, he gets played quite a bit. I think David had a lesson not too long ago. He read a portion from Paul Harvey back in the 50s or something.
He is special. That's like a whole spiel as if I were the devil.
Yeah, that's right. And he pretty much nailed it.
Yeah. That sounds like pretty accurate.
Well, I don't know. It's early. It's not quite 11 o'clock. We got about 10 minutes to 11. But we ended a little bit early from 10. That's what I mean. I can't even read the clock. I mean, but I think we'll go ahead and get started. I think I may have more stuff to talk about than we have time for. So let's take advantage of having some extra time. We'll go ahead and begin our class, and let's start with a word of prayer. Almighty God in heaven, we are so thankful that we are here today. We're so thankful that we can call ourselves your children, that you are our God. Father, we pray for our time today, that you'll help us to understand your word, to see the challenges and the trials that your children faced, the mistakes they made, the consequences of those mistakes, but also see the glory you provide every day. Lord, help us to build our faith and to live one day at a time, Father, in service of you. Thank you for your Son, Jesus, and it's in his name we pray. Amen. All right, so we have been covering, of course, our class is 1st and 2nd Chronicles, so we have just finished 2nd Chronicles 1 through 9, and we covered the life of David, all the way up until Solomon, his son, became the king. And we just finished Solomon's reign. And so at the end of our last class, Solomon died and was buried in the city of David. And Rehoboam, his son, succeeded him as king. So we want to kind of recap, though, Solomon's life. And so we're not in the book. This is just us discussing Solomon. Because Solomon, how do we normally view Solomon? What's Solomon's greatest? What's he greatestly known for? Wisdom. Wisest man ever that lived. And where did he gain his wisdom from? God. He asked God for wisdom. God said, I will give you anything that your heart desires. Just tell me. And he said, Lord, give me wisdom so that I can rule your people well.
And then God, because he asked for wisdom and his heart was right, and God gave him wisdom, but God gave him also riches. He gave him power. He gave him all these things, which I will say ultimately led to his downfall. We'll get to that in a little bit. It didn't have to be that way. And that's the important thing. Because you can have riches and you can have power, but you can still serve God. And so we're going to kind of go through Solomon's ups and his downs today. And John, good to see you, brother.
Thank you.
I had extra time, so I'm taking it.
Okay, good.
All right. All right. So one thing we want to make sure we talk about is that what we studied so far from 1st and 2nd Chronicles is from the perspective of the chronicler. And we don't really know who wrote Chronicles per se, but what we'll say is that the perspective was from a very religious perspective. So it painted Solomon in a very positive light. Solomon took the reign as king. He had been given the blueprint by David, the blueprint for building the temple, the blueprint for how the Levites were to be priests, how offices were to be assigned, and he took that lead from David, and he executed everything that he was commanded to do. And it's just really, really good for us to look at that from the Chronicles perspective. He was a faithful and a great king. So on the wall in our kids' rooms, he gets a smiley face next to his name, right? So he asked for wisdom. He also built the temple. He brought the ark to the temple. He constantly prayed and honored God. He kept all the sacrifices and all the feasts. He built palaces, rebuilt cities, expanded borders. He was admired and respected and trusted by kings and queens all over the world. It wasn't just in Israel. He was admired and respected by the world. And they often sent people to hear him, to ask him questions. We talked about the Queen of Sheba Wednesday night. And so she came to test his knowledge, and she was blown away by what she heard and what she saw. And so let's look at some of the other perspectives of his life. And let's start over in 1 Kings chapter 3. So turn your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 3. So when he asked God for wisdom, and God gave that to him, it provided him with discernment. And in 1 Kings chapter 3, this is when he asked God, but then he had, at the end of that chapter, verses 16 to 28, this is the story of the two prostitutes. And the two prostitutes both had babies, and during the night, one of the babies died. And the mother swapped the babies out. So, because she wanted a living baby, she didn't want a dead baby. So she swapped the babies out, and then they were brought before the king for the king to pass judgment on who's going to get the baby. So let's read verses 23 through 27. Who would like to read that?
Then the king said, the one says, this is my son that is alive, and your son is dead. And the other says, no, but your son is dead, and my son is the living one. And the king said, bring me a sword. So a sword was brought before the king. And the king said, divide the living child in two, and give half to the one and half to the other. Then the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because her heart yearned for her son, O my lord, give her the living child, and by no means put him to death. But the other said, he shall be neither mine nor yours, divide him. Then the king answered and said, give the living child to the first woman, and by no means put him to death. She is his mother. And all Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice.
So the wisdom of God was in him to provide judgment. It provided him with great discernment. You know, that was specifically what he asked for. Whenever he asked for that wisdom, it was so he could judge his people and rule his people well. So God gave him exactly what he needed, and he provided for him. So he provided discernment, but he also gave him knowledge. And let's look over at 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 29 through 34. So somebody read 29 through 34.
And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and greatest of mind like the sand on the seashore. So that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of the people of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all other men, wiser than Ethan the Israelite. And he manned Calcol and Darvid, the sons of Nahus, and his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of the trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon, and to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds, and of reptiles and of fish. And people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom.
All right. So God's wisdom provided him with insight and knowledge. So when we think about science, and our scientists today, they do research. They've got all kinds of instruments and studies that they do. Now, Solomon didn't have that stuff back in that time, but Solomon did have God, and God gave him insights into the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom. He was able to describe that life, how life lives, and use that knowledge, use that ability to enhance the kingdom, and also not just the kingdom, but it enhanced the world, because folks from all over the world were coming to hear Solomon's wisdom. So he was able to share these things and understandings of the natural world that really was not understood at that time. And we also know that Solomon was, he liked to write. He wrote a lot. He put his wisdom down on paper that could be passed along to us, to future generations, to pass that wisdom and share that wisdom. So he was attributed 3 books in the Bible. And anybody know what those 3 books are?
Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon.
All right, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. And so let's turn over to Proverbs. I want to start there. Proverbs chapter 1. So this book was written to impart wisdom to all who read it, and the wisdom given from God. So I want to read verses 1 through 7. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, for acquiring a disciplined and prudent life, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. For understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. So ultimately that lays out the purpose for Proverbs. And then we know that as we go through this, Solomon covers hundreds of topics that relate to our daily life. Things like avoiding sin and enticement, living moral and upright lives, remaining faithful to God, remaining faithful to our spouse, seeking wisdom and not folly, working diligently with our hands, not being lazy, being honest, disciplined, knowing how to accept correction, avoiding our pride, how to respond to hostility with gentleness, seeking God's way and not our own, controlling our tongue, being wary of the trappings of wealth, being honest and fair in our business practices, respecting and honoring our wives, and training our children in love. We think about just those concepts, which there are many more concepts covered through Proverbs. That's really the basis of what it is for us to train our children, for us to be Christians. Everything that God gives us the answers in Proverbs. Is there anything else that y'all think that y'all want to bring up related to Proverbs that's beneficial to all of us? I mean, it's all beneficial. All of Proverbs is beneficial. Is there anything specifically that y'all want to bring up, or any particular passage in Proverbs y'all wanted to read?
There are many instructions of a father to a son, so it's a good book for parents and training children and telling children what they need to know, because it is the first few chapters in particular are a father to a son warning his son about things that he will encounter in the world and what to avoid.
The one that always comes to my mind is, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord.
I mean, also it makes me think about the fact that David did that very thing for Solomon. He gave him instruction, he gave him advice, he told him to put God first and to have peace and to put on his armor, to be strong and diligent. And, I mean, that's really sound, good advice. And I think he appreciated that, and it shows throughout all of this that not only did he appreciate it, but he wanted to do the same. And so, to John's point, I think as a parent, it just kind of speaks to, like, you know, if you take the time and you put forth the energy and you are diligent, then one of these days, maybe not right now, but they'll appreciate it, and you'll be able to see the fruit in the labor. Because as a parent, it is hard because you don't always see the fruit of the labor immediately.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it doesn't mean that our kids are going to be perfect.
Right.
Doesn't mean that we were perfect. We all made our mistakes. But that's the difference between wisdom and folly. Is wisdom is recognizing our mistakes and being able to correct them. And folly is just continuing in them. Another passage that sticks out to me is Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight.
And that was part of the instructions of a father to a son, because verse 1 says, my son, do not forget in my teaching. And then he goes on to, that's part of his teaching. Trust in the Lord with all your heart.
All right. So
he has a fair amount to say about wives in Solomon.
He does that.
Proverbs. And he had much experience along that line.
Well,
I like the passages that talk about, you know, like dripping rain and so on and so forth. So is a nagging wife. And Solomon must have had some experience with those.
Well, it would seem like it would be a never ending.
Yeah.
Especially when you have that many.
Yeah.
You know, it's like take a number. You know, there are certainly a number of times that he does mention specifically regarding the wives, and he talks about warnings against adultery, and he talks about you know, our desire is for our wife, and that's what we need to keep, our desire for our spouse, and for them alone. I find it odd that. And then we'll talk a little bit later about Song of Solomon, and it's his love letter. Which wife did he write that to? That's an interesting thought. I mean, But it just feels like there's an awful lot of adultery going on with Solomon, but yet he writes wisdom for us, but he didn't take his own. He's got the wisdom, but he didn't take his own advice. Does that make sense?
Well, I guess, I mean, at this time, it was not technically, it wasn't against the law for him to have multiple wives. I mean, apparently God accepted that aspect of this, and he wasn't condemned for that. And so there was a time that in the Old Testament that was allotted. So we have a hard time understanding that because we can't apply that today because we're under a different law and our lives are different. But yes, to that point, it's kind of hard to go, wow, you wrote about adultery. If he, as the king, who could essentially say, I'm just going to marry this person, well, why would you have any need for adultery if you were allowed to marry as many women as you wanted? Why wouldn't you just marry her and have her as your wife, and then you'd never have any need for adultery? But it's strange. It's a hard thing to understand the concept of us today who are required to only have one wife.
And also, we also have to remember, too, Solomon was born to Bathsheba, and David committed adultery with Bathsheba. So I think he understood the trauma that caused, because there was turmoil in his family with his siblings, with his half-siblings, David's other sons and daughters. There had to have been that turmoil. And so, again, it's these warnings for us to remain faithful to our spouses.
Again, most of that is in his advice to his son. He's advising his son to stay away from that. I like the picture that he has about adultery is like sweeping coals into your lap. You can imagine that, that would be very harmful, and you want to get away from that pretty quickly. But that's a picture in our mind.
Well, and whenever we get into our lesson on Wednesday night, we're going to be talking about Rehoboam, his son, who succeeds him. And now Rehoboam's got his faults. He has some good aspects, but he has a lot of faults. He didn't have nearly as many wives, but he still had a bunch. Anyway, but he didn't have long enough. He only had 17 years. So
I do like it that Proverbs is the only book in the Bible that says gray hair. It's a good thing.
You like it now.
Yeah.
I don't know if all of his writings, I think some of his writings he's reflecting back on some of the things he may have learned. So I don't, he had to learn some lessons the hard way, and it's easier to write about them when you maybe made them and maybe tried to correct some of them.
I've heard it said that experience is the best teacher. So we learn what not to do sometimes by doing it.
Well,
and then we try to teach our children not to make the same mistakes that we made.
There's a saying that experience allows you to make good decisions, but a lot of that experience comes from bad decisions you made. So if you learn from them, and Solomon hopefully learned from them. And Ecclesiastes is probably a book that reflects more of that looking back than Proverbs does.
We're about to get into Ecclesiastes. Yeah, Matthew?
I was listening to a sermon the other day, and none of us like the trials and the hardships, but when you think back and you look back, kind of like what they were saying, the Lord shapes you more in the trial and the fire than He will when everything's just good and fine. If you think about it, I mean, it's true in the home life. When everything's fine, I'm not nearly as close to the Lord as when I'm in the fire.
Mm-hmm.
So, knowing and doing, Solomon could have known. I mean, obviously he knew all kinds of stuff, but knowing and doing is two different things. And he very well could have went through all that and regretted it, not necessarily changed it all the way, but he could have learned a lot of things through the fire.
Absolutely.
That's 100% perspective. And which is harder, knowing or doing?
I mean, I think that's all of us. We can all write words of wisdom, but
yeah,
that's the difference. Knowing and doing is two completely different things. we can all say what we should do or what we're supposed to do, but how many times have we not done or should have done in a particular situation?
It's very interesting too, because the modern approach to today is the opposite of doing. It's, even with Buddhism, it's emptying your mind, which is doing nothing. Like you're literally just trying to get rid of thoughts, trying to get rid of everything, and just emptying your mind. And to me, that's bizarre. Even the Bible talks about if you do that, demons will fill it. You have to fill it with something good. You have to fill it with God. Otherwise, it's not good. But I actually had a really long, in-depth conversation about a topic, a philosophical topic, that came about in 2006 that I'd never heard of. And it was a guy that took the stance of what's called anti-natalist. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it's a new philosophy that talks about how it is morally wrong to procreate and bring life into the world because life is harm and life is suffering. And so their stance is that by choosing to not bring life in the world, you're solving the problem. You're not causing harm anymore. You're not part of the problem by bringing them into the world. And because they're unborn and they don't exist, you can't ask them their permission if they would like to be brought into the world to suffer. And so it's a very weird stance and mind-boggling. I sit there and listen to it for an hour before I just couldn't not speak, and basically just had to come in and just combat this rhetoric of nonsense. But like, that's the thing. It's like all of the modern mentality is sitting on their hands and doing nothing. And that was my challenge to this guy. I was like, it sounds to me like you're doing nothing. Like you see a problem, and your answer to the solution is to do nothing. So if there's harm in the world, there's suffering in the world, what are you doing? And his choice was to not procreate and do anything. And I'm like, if everybody in the world took your stance, like you would cease to exist. And he was like, would that be a problem? And I'm like, yes it is. And so, but it's just a very weird stance today that like we would rather sit on our hands and do nothing rather than to step up, do the hard work, and make a difference. And that was my challenge to this guy. I was like, I think you would be better served in your position of ending suffering if you actually dedicated your life to ending suffering versus sitting on your hands.
I think it's like what Matthew said. I mean, when you get thrust into the fire, you've got a choice. We all have choice, and we can take that experience and grow stronger and closer to God through it, or we can allow that experience to drive us further from God, further into sin. It's choices.
Just two of my favorite passages in Proverbs are both in chapter 4. Verse 18 says, the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. And I think that pictures our growth in God, that it's steady, but it's just simple steps. So that if you think about when the sun comes up, it's dark, and all of a sudden it begins to get light over in the horizon, and then before you know it, it's daytime. And Solomon says that's how the righteous should be, that it's steady but just small growth until you get to full light. And then verse 23 says, keep your heart with all diligence, for from it flows the springs of life. So Solomon is saying, protect what you let into your heart, because that's going to affect your life.
And ultimately, isn't that what happened to Solomon?
Ultimately, it is.
Ultimately, that is Solomon's demise, because he had a heart for God. We go back to the very beginning of his reign, and he had a heart of God. He asked for wisdom to lead the people. And he wanted nothing more than to build God's temple and to worship God and honor Him and sacrifice to Him. But then his heart was invaded by these by the idols, by his foreign wives that didn't put the same value on God and who God was and His holiness and His righteousness, they didn't have that value. Their value was in Ashtoreth and these other gods that they thought were important. And then slowly, little by little, their influence. It wasn't like overnight Solomon decided to erect a temple and Asherah poles to these other gods. It was a slow, steady. It was like the faucet just had a trickle of water. Like when I left the house today, I'm sure I didn't have to. I left my water running. I don't want to come home to any busted pipes. Doesn't happen during the daytime typically, but I don't want it to happen today. So I left that water trickling. But if you've got bad influences just trickling in, eventually the trickle becomes a stream, and the stream becomes a flood, and the flood becomes an ocean. And it starts out with just the drip. So we got to make sure we shut that faucet off.
Well, there's that verse, right, that says first you talk, and then you walk, and then you sit, and then you lie with it, or something like that.
I'm trying to think where that is.
You know what I'm talking about? Isn't it?
When you walk in your walk,
how sin slowly comes into your life. It's not just like what you were saying.
I'll try to think of it. We'll get it. Maybe it'll pop in my head before the end of the class. All right, so many lessons for us to learn through Proverbs, and so just really, in nearly every verse you can find a unique topic that brings a nice perspective, a godly perspective. So now let's turn over to Ecclesiastes. Well, the end of Proverbs, I just always have loved Proverbs 31. The virtuous woman, her price is far above rubies, and her husband faithfully trusts in her. That is the most godly story of marriage there is, and I just love that's one of my favorite passages in Proverbs. So we're going to talk about Ecclesiastes. So we know that later in his life, Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. We don't know exactly when it was in his life, but it was later. And my personal thoughts is it was as he was getting ready to die. I think that he knew death was coming. And we all know. All of us, no matter our age in this room, we all know that death is coming. We don't know when.
Hurry up.
No. But we know that through death, though, is reward for us as Christians. So it's not the end. It is merely the beginning. It is the step. And Solomon writes Ecclesiastes really because he's realizing that everything he's done, his great wisdom, his great wealth, his powerful kingdom, everything that he has built and amassed and become the most famous man in the world, it is all about to be over. He is about to die. And everything that he has is about to be handed over to someone else. And they're going to do with it as they see fit, not as he sees fit. And we think about, let's go back to David. When David was about to die, David thrust himself into the planning of the temple. And God provided him how it was to be built. God provided what was to be done. God provided how everything was supposed to be organized. But David wrote that out, and he provided it to Solomon. And Solomon had a choice, didn't he? He didn't have to execute those things. He could have said, God said build it 33 cubits and this cubits. it really needs to be twice that size, doesn't it? I mean, it's God. It should be twice that size. He did not. He followed the pattern that was laid before him. And his son, Rehoboam, when Rehoboam takes control, he does for a couple of years. We're going to talk about that on Wednesday. He does for a little bit, but then he chooses to do what he wants to do. So Solomon, throughout his life, he had followed God, but then at some point his life took a turn. And perhaps he put more value and more strength in his wealth, his possessions. He put more stock into himself than he did into the Lord. And so let's start out in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. These are the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Verse 2, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What does man gain from all his labor at which he toils at under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, and yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome. More than one can say, the eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been seen, or what has been, will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time. There is no remembrance of old men, and even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow. All right, so he's kind of setting the stage, kind of where his mind is. And that version it said meaningless. Everything in life is meaningless. And in other versions it's vanity. I mean, it's like, you know, you're doing it just so you can look good. I always think about a vanity mirror. You know, I got the vanity mirror in my truck. I pull it down. I want to make sure I got my hairstyle just right. You know, I need to worry about my hairstyle, don't I? I got a lot of it. Yeah, John knows. So I don't look in that vanity mirror for myself because it is what it is. I'm not gonna take anything to grow my hair. I'm not gonna do all that kind of stuff. But whenever we're turning it back to check us and all that stuff, there's a certain vanity in that. There's a certain vanity in that. I mean, for all of us. I mean, look, we all do it. I mean, we all looked in the mirror this morning. We all brushed our hair, except for my son. He did not brush his hair. He did brush his teeth. I promise you. The toothbrush was wet before we left. But he did not brush it. Huh?
He can brush his hair in the car.
Oh, did he? Oh, I missed that. He would have gotten here without it unless Julia had noticed, because I wouldn't have noticed it.
He had it just like he wanted it.
He did. He wakes up, he's good. He's good. I mean, I guess he thinks in his mind, that's the way God made me. So, that's the way, and it's perfect. That's the way God made me. I'm perfect. So, I don't know. But sometimes we focus, I know I do. I focus on the outward. I focus on appearance too much. And Solomon, in his wisdom, now he's at the end of his life, and now he says, he realizes everything that he has worked for, everything he has built, it's worthless. It's worthless. In verse 12 through 18, he talks here, he devoted himself to study and exploration and growth in knowledge, and he applied himself to wisdom and knowledge. But he also realizes that it's chasing after the wind. So down in verse Verse 13, I devoted myself to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under heaven. What a heavy burden God has laid on men. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I thought to myself, look, I have grown and increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned too that this is chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. So, even through knowledge, he realizes everything's meaningless. I'm the smartest person in the world, and I'm about to be dead. My knowledge is going to pass with me. It's going to be gone. My son, he ain't got it. We don't know how much time Solomon actually spent with his son. You know, in the Proverbs, John specifically mentioned it earlier. He was talking about so much of it is written from a father to a son to pass that wisdom down. We don't really know how much Solomon trained Rehoboam to take the throne. Obviously, we're going to get to it Wednesday. He didn't train him that great.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. That's right.
Or the son didn't listen that great.
Well, exactly. And look, we can.
His mother was an Ammonite.
Ma'am?
His mother was an Ammonite. Right?
Correct.
Right.
So he had the tools, and we should assume that Solomon imparted that wisdom to him, or gave him at least the talk. Now, just because we hear the talk, or we read the passage, we read what's written in the note, does that impart us the wisdom? It does not. And so we're going to talk about Rehoboam on Wednesday. Yes, sir.
It probably should show us too, I mean, at least to some scale. You know, in the beginning, Solomon was a lot different than he was in his later part. But you got to think some of that just comes back to David was there and, you know, not far gone. And maybe Rehoboam was better when Solomon was there, and then Solomon dies, and just the influence alone, not necessarily the teachings. I mean, just like we all know the teachings, but that should show us that we should also keep good influence around us, because, again, we all know right and wrong, but how much harder is that whenever the influence is not there to keep us doing the things that we know that we should be doing, or not doing the things that we shouldn't be doing. So, I mean, I got to think that obviously David did a good job. Solomon was wise. You know that he took some care in training, but you can only do so much, and when you're gone, you can't do anything else. So, to me, just the influence alone could have steered both of them, or the lack of influence from their father could have steered them in the wrong direction, or at least not held it back.
And it's also, you make a good point. It's about being surrounded by the right influences and folks that we can seek counsel from. And so that is part of what Rehoboam's downfall was, or at least a lot of his problems initially. We'll talk about that Wednesday. It's a good lead in for Wednesday. But when we think about, I think about the Lord's church, and I think about, we're all imperfect. We all make mistakes. But we are here. We're supportive of each other. When someone struggles, if we know, and the only thing is, how do we know when somebody's struggling? We always had to wait for them to walk to the aisle, right? And they have to announce to us that they're struggling. And if you don't do that, then that's your own problem, right?
No.
No. How do I know my brother's struggling?
Ask him.
I ask him. I talk to him. I know him. I love him. I ask the questions. If something doesn't seem right, I really need to call Alex. Man, I tell you what, that LSU influence is. I love him. I got to talk to him. I mean, look, sometimes I make fun of LSU. That's okay, man. I love you. You know that. We have to know each other. And if we don't, how can we help somebody if we don't know them? Now, obviously, we know some folks better than others, but that should never stop us from trying to understand everybody better. Because look, if I'm struggling, and look, there's times that I struggle, but it's always great to know that I've got some brothers that I can call. I could call at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I know they're going to answer their phone. I know it. And I hope that each one of y'all have somebody that you know, if you dial that number, they're going to answer that phone. And that is what surrounding ourselves with love and wisdom is, because when we're struggling, we don't see what's right in front of us, we need wise counsel. Someone that's going to give us biblical counsel, not just, well, I think you should do this. I think you should do this. I don't care what the elders say. You should do this. That's bad advice. Bad advice. And y'all, ultimately, we have 6 men here, our shepherds, that love us. They're not perfect men either. So if we're all thinking that they're perfect and we're going to hold them on that pedestal, they're not. Let's not do that. But they love each and every one of us. And we need to seek their counsel and seek their assistance. So that's the beauty of the Lord's church, in my opinion.
It's like a introduction to Hedges.
It's a good class too. If you haven't taken Hedges, has everybody in here taken Hedges? Who has not taken Hedges? All right, well, you're missing out.
I'm taking next course.
Okay.
I can imagine that, but as a team, I could see how there would be a difficult scenario where you have to maintain your position, maintain your respect, maintain your authority, but create the scenario where you surround yourself by people you can trust, by people that you can talk to that will, that's about accountability. And as someone that's in an authoritative position, especially like the dean, that I could see how that could be difficult and hard to trust and hard to find the right people to put in the right places. Otherwise, you could be systematically setting yourself for your own rebellion.
Yep.
That's a difficult scenario.
Yeah. And I tell you what, if I'm seeking somebody for wisdom, I'm going for some gray hair. Or no hair. Gray hair, no hair.
Gray hair is kind of splendor. It's tamed by weight of righteousness.
That's it. All right. So let's flip. We're gonna get moving. We got about 10 minutes left. So Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 4 through 11. Somebody read 4 through 11, please. Ecclesiastes 2, 4 through 11.
I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves. Also, I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers, and the pleasures of men many concubines. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Thus I considered all my activities, which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity, and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun.
Thank you. He withheld nothing that he desired. You know, that means he had no limit. He had no limit, no guardrail. I can get anything I want, do anything I want, go anywhere I want, have anyone I want, buy anyone I want. But it said, I think it's interesting that it said in verse 9, in all of this, my wisdom stayed with me. That's interesting. So he was able to go through all this folly and all this, but his wisdom stayed with him. He denied himself. Huh?
Does that mean he didn't?
I don't think so. No. I don't know. In the end, though, verse 11, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind, and nothing was gained under the sun. So, now, nothing was gained. He amassed fortune. I mean, gold, just the amount of gold that he had, and silver, precious stones, he amassed a lot. Why was it vanity? Because you can't take it with you. There are no U-Haul trucks attached to hearses. I'll tell you a quick funny story. Funeral director, humor. So a funeral director gets a call from his best friend. He says, I need to come to my house. I'm about to die. So he goes to his house and he shows up, and his other best friend is there, the doctor and the lawyer. So it's a doctor, a lawyer, and a funeral director. And so the man says, guys, I'm about to die. And I'm very wealthy, and I want to make sure I take my wealth with me. So I want each one of y'all to take these briefcases with you when you go. And there's $5 million in each suitcase. And when I die, you promise me you're going to put the money in the casket with me. They're like, okay. So the man dies the next day, and they go to the funeral home, and the lawyer comes in and he's got this briefcase. He says, man, $5 million. I could do so much with $5 million. But Billy, I love you. I'm going to follow him. He puts the $5 million in the bottom of the casket, and he goes out. The doctor comes in. He says, man, with $5 million, I could buy an MRI machine. I could do so much good for folks that are in need, and I could do all these things. But I made a promise, Billy, I love you. And he put the briefcase in the casket. And the funeral director came in and said, Billy, how much I love you, my brother. Man, I still love you so much. He wrote a check for $15 million, put it in his pocket, and removed the two cases. Anyway, sorry about that. I shouldn't have. I wasted a minute for that, but anyway, I love a funeral director, Joe. All right, so turn over to Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Ecclesiastes 12, verses 13 and 14, the conclusion of the matter. So everything that he talks about through Ecclesiastes, and he says, now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. So everything in his life he knows is about to be over. It's about to be gone. Perhaps he's written Ecclesiastes after God has told him, I'm going to tear the kingdom from your hand. And I think this is when he wrote it. I think Solomon was clipping along, thinking he's got everything going. Man, I'm great. And then God says, I'm going to tear the kingdom from your hand. But not from your hand, but from your son that comes after you. And then Solomon realizes everything that he's done, everything that he's built, it's not all going to be for his son. He can't take it with him. He realizes it's all vanity. And the conclusion of the matter is fear God and keep His commandments. I think Solomon realizes at the end of all this that he did not keep God's commandments. And it says, for God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it's good or evil. So Solomon has been brought into judgment, or will be brought into judgment. Actually, he's already been judged at this point, in my opinion. I think that God has made the decision, I'm going to tear, I think he's already told him, I'm tearing the kingdom from you. All right. We got to ask one more question.
Some think that Ecclesiastes represents Solomon's repentance for his life, and that at the end he turned back. But the consequences were still there.
That's right. The sin was already done, and God had made a decision. So we've got to ask the question. I didn't get to it as far as I want. So where did Solomon go wrong? This was Solomon's ups and Solomon's downs. And where did Solomon go wrong?
He allowed his wives, his foreign wives, to worship their false idols amongst them. He should have required them to put them away, or he should have never married those women.
He should have never married them. He should have never married them. He had way too many of them. But Matthew hit the nail on the head. He did not put God first. All right, y'all. Thank you. Now let's go ahead and everybody be prepared for our lesson number 11. Lesson 11 on Wednesday.
Well, lesson 11, my home study.
All right, cool. So did everything come through good? Everybody could hear and everything?
We had 4 that night, and this week is coming up. We're going to have more.
That's great.
And the people were wheelchair bound.
Yeah.
And, they keep going. And all.
So that's a blessing to them for you to be able to do that with them.
Maybe at the right time.
That's awesome, brother. Use what God gives you.
Yes. Got some stuffy in there. There's freezing in the back. Was it really? Oh, sugar.
I don't know about that.